On July 15th of 2020, the judge in Minneapolis made public, sort of, body cam footage in the death of George Floyd at the hands, or rather knees, of police officer Derek Chauvin, a death that sparked riots across the country and even across the world. Let's talk a little bit about the release of that footage and what we can learn new about the situation. Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to Law-Splaining the Interwebs. I'm your host, Nick Rekieta of Rekieta Law, a small law firm in central Minnesota. And today we're talking about the sort of newly released body cam footage in the death of George Floyd. Of course, it's not released for you or for me or for most people on the planet. It was released in a limited semi-public viewing by appointment at the Hennepin County Courthouse. There were 11 computers set up. There were 6 one-hour time slots for people to go. So effectively 66 viewings have occurred of the footage for the public. Now, some people have viewed that and then transcribed what they saw as best they could into news reports, and we're going to look at one in this video to see what new information we can get about some interesting parts of the encounter, some maybe unanswered questions. At least for me, I'll go to what I found to be interesting in the report. You guys should check it out for yourself. I'm going to include the link in the description to the article I'm looking at. It's from the Minneapolis Star Tribune, and it has one of the more comprehensive breakdowns that I've seen of the video, including timestamps. But it has a lot of editorializing in it, and you have to be cautious in how you look at this footage or how you look at the reporting on this footage, because it is heavily editorialized and will be skewed by the lens of the journalist who's reporting on it. None of them are just reporting facts. They're adding in their own perceptions, biases, and opinions. Now, in my full disclosure, my bias is sympathetic towards George Floyd, because I do believe that Officer Derek Chauvin used too much force, either negligently or intentionally, to kill George Floyd. Now, I don't have evidence that he was intentionally killing George Floyd, and I certainly don't have any evidence that he was intentionally doing it based on George Floyd's race. So if you're looking for a sort of race baiting video, you're not going to find it here. I don't think that is the motivation. There may be some underlying systemic racism or something like that, but I don't have that to work on, and I don't have evidence from Chauvin of direct racism. There may be some evidence of just general indifference, or I would say even reckless disregard for the life and safety of a citizen, and that is a problem for me, but I don't have any evidence to go further than that. Let's very briefly talk about the transparency issue here. The judge has made this semi-public, although not very public, and I think that's a problem. This footage should be released broadly. And the reason this footage should be released broadly is because whenever the state takes the life of a citizen, the citizenry should have access to the footage of the state doing the act. They should be able to review it. It should be as transparent as possible. And here we have a lot of body cam footage available that is not allowed to be reviewed by the public. So we are left with the editorialized, lensed interpretation of a few people. And I think that is a mistake. I think the judge is trying to prevent some sort of further riot or protest, and that he thinks that releasing the video would be a spark towards that. And I'm sorry, that may be true. It might be. We'll never know, I suppose. But I think there is much more concern with having the public have the information that is available and having it transparent. I do not think that the government concealing part of the information about the death of a citizen is a good thing. So that being said, that's what I think about it. Does the judge have the power to suppress the release of evidence in the case? Yeah, he can. He can do that. That's within his discretion, at least at this point. And if you want to go against it, maybe you can file a Freedom of Information Act request on it, and you will get that footage much later than tomorrow. So that being said, why don't we take a look at the article, and I'll show you the problem with editorializing right up front. So the title of this article is Bodycam Video in George Floyd Killing Shows Officer Pulled Gun, Swore, and Touched Floyd Multiple Times Without Explanation. This is not in any way, in my opinion, relevant to whether or not Chauvin is criminally liable for the death of George Floyd, or whether the other 3 attending officers are liable either. And so they're focusing on stuff like profanity and touching of Floyd, which may have set some of the tone, but it doesn't explain why an officer ends up with his knee on the back of a man's neck and stays there for long enough for the person to expire. That is a different question and a much more important question, but this is the editorializing you're going to get in any of these accounts. It's going to be lensed towards what was interesting to the observer or important to the observer. Not interesting or important to me are these questions. My interest comes at the time that Chauvin kneels on George Floyd's neck and what's happening in the immediate moments before that. Because the part that they're talking about here, where the officer pulled the gun, swore, and touched Floyd multiple times, is separated from the hostile encounter by about 6 minutes. And at the time this is happening, Derek Chauvin isn't even present. He's not there. So the guy who ultimately ends up with his knee on the guy's neck isn't even on the scene when this stuff is happening. It's just not that interesting to me. And I don't think this speaks to the liability of Officer Lane or Officer Kung in their cases either. Something that I have a problem with as well. I don't know that a murder charge is appropriate for those guys, and I've maintained that position throughout all of my reporting on this case. But this first section, we're going to skip most of this article. The first section here just talks about the release of the footage. One interesting thing from this first section is they dispute the amount of time that Chauvin was on Floyd's neck, saying it was actually 9.5 minutes. It was originally 8.5 minutes, and it was like 7 minutes, 45 seconds. They're saying, based on timestamps of the body cam, that it's 9 minutes and 30 seconds. And so that is... that's kind of at issue, I guess, but it's not that big of an issue. 8 minutes and 9.5 minutes are not going, like that minute and a half is probably not going to be the difference between a guilty verdict and a not guilty verdict. But the other thing that is brought up here is that these videos came from Lane's attorney, Earl Gray, who's a famous defense attorney in Minnesota. And he argues that Lane should be removed from the case. Basically that he is not culpable for the murder of George Floyd. And part of his argument is something that I brought up earlier, is that this is a rookie officer and Chauvin is a 19-year veteran. And maybe even involved in the training of this rookie officer in some way. So Lane asks a couple times if they should turn Floyd over off of his stomach and onto his back. Or onto his side, and Chauvin dismisses that. And so Earl Gray's argument is going to stem around the liability of this junior officer responding to the direction of a senior officer. And I think it's a good argument for both Lane and Kung, who I am still skeptical of their murder charges, maybe accessory to manslaughter or something like that, but I don't believe that these guys manifested the same level of reckless disregard or even intent to cause the death of George Floyd. And part of that is Lane specifically asking twice, maybe we should roll him over. And then Kung, after checking Floyd's pulse and finding him unable to find a pulse, he actually gets off and ceases restraining Floyd, while Chauvin and Lane continue to restrain him for 3 minutes. Lane is on his is patrolling Floyd's legs. And Kung was on his lower back and Chauvin was up on his knee. So these are some interesting sort of things that have come out from this footage. The other interesting thing that is not really answered here is, why did the officer pull a gun on George Floyd initially? Now, Earl Grey argues that Floyd's hands were below the seat and were not visible to the officers, like he was looking for something. This is the same argument that was used in the shooting of Philando Castile, that his hands were reaching towards a gun or reaching below a seat and they were not visible. That's apparently not readily discernible from the video, but who knows? It's based on what the journalists saw. Again, this is the problem with not having transparency. One of the big problems with the initial encounter is that they don't ever tell Floyd, or I shouldn't say ever, they don't until about 6 minutes into the encounter tell Floyd why they're doing all this in the first place. That's after they have him out of the car and handcuffed and have walked him away from the car. They inform him of the fake bill, to which Floyd responds, yeah. Now, we don't know if that yeah means, yeah, I passed a fake bill, or yeah, that's why you're here, or yeah, I understand. But that's what we get from this. They inform him about the fake bill about 6 minutes into the encounter. He's removed from the van and handcuffed about 3 minutes into the encounter, to give you an idea of what's going on. So he is asked to step out of the vehicle, he's removed from the vehicle, and he is handcuffed prior to having any idea why he's being handcuffed. Now, does that have any bearing on the actual killing? I don't think so. Personally, again, I think the amount of time that passes, maybe some rookie screw-ups, maybe his rights would have been violated in some small way, and he would have been able to complain about it. But ultimately, you know, in regards to the death, this stuff doesn't play into it. So we're going to skip most of this information and get to this point here. This is the kneeling on the neck section, and this is where the security camera footage that was released and then the subsequent video that was released by Sean King is cuts off. If you remember from the security cam footage, they get Floyd, he's kind of on a wall, handcuffed for a while, sitting, and then they take him over to the car, and right as they get over to the squad car, he falls. And it was unclear what was going on, and I think we later found out that he expressed apprehension at being placed in the car, said he had claustrophobia and did not want to go in the squad car, and that is probably why he fell. Based on just what I've seen, that's my guess. I don't believe the officers shoved him or anything like that, but they do, from that point on, attempt to get him into the car. And this brings in the tweet from Sean King, in which he said they were beating the heck out of George Floyd while trying to get him into the car, which I didn't actually see on the video. The same thing Sean King saw. I saw them struggling with him. I did not see any punches or strikes or any sort of beating. But what we do see at the end of that clip, which is really interesting, was that he's like comes out of the other side of the car. And we found out that he was in the car for a while and that he got out. And a big question remained. Why was he out of the car after being in it? And we get that answer here. Lane and Kung struggled for about 3 minutes to get Floyd into the back of their squad, as each of them stood on either side of the vehicle with the doors open. Floyd, who told them he was claustrophobic and pleaded with them to stop, fell sideways into the car after Kung pressed one hand on his chest and the other on his head. So sort of like this. Lane tried to pull Floyd in from the rear passenger side. So Lane's on the other side and he's trying to get him in, because you got to get his legs into the car, you know, and then you got to sit him up in the seat or something like that. You got to get it so you can close the doors. Floyd continued to wheeze, telling them he just had COVID and couldn't breathe. Eventually, Floyd's body twisted out of the passenger door and his knees slid to the pavement. So he squirms his way out. It looks like. It doesn't appear that the officers pulled him out, at least based on the reporters' reporting of the video, is that he appears to have wiggled himself out of the car. Now, I read in a different publication that he says, "Thank you," after he gets out of the car. Like he genuinely did not want to be in there. He was panicking. Now he's out. And then, but that's not here. And again, I wish we had transparency. You try and put pieces together, but we're all just trying. So who knows? But then we've got Kung pushed him forward to the ground and restrained his legs as Chauvin knelt on his neck. Now, this is weird because this disagrees with something they say in just a second. Chauvin and Tu Tao have arrived to assist their colleagues. About 11 minutes into Lane's video, Lane grabbed Floyd's leg and helped Chauvin and Kung flip Floyd from his back onto his stomach in the street, which is weird because he pushed him forward onto the ground and restrained his legs as Chauvin knelt on his neck. So again, we're left with a gap. If they pushed him forward and then Chauvin kneels on him, why do they then need assistance to turn him over for Chauvin to kneel on him? Don't know. Don't know what's going on there. Thanks a lot. No transparency. About 11 minutes. Oh, wait. Yeah. The body cam video and video recorded by a bystander showed Chauvin kneeling on Floyd's neck while he said he couldn't breathe, called out for his mama several times, and warned the officers he was going to die. Bystanders also pleaded with the officers to stop and check his pulse. We've all seen the bystander video, I believe, at this point. Kung knelt on Floyd's back while Lane knelt and held onto his legs. Tao managed bystanders at the scene dismissed their concerns. Lane's video showed that he asked twice about rolling Floyd onto his side, but did not appear to express any sense of urgency, fear, or persistence in his voice. Again, this is needless editorializing, in my opinion, because he expresses concern for the life and safety of the person, even if there's no urgency, fear, or persistence subjective to the journalist in his voice. That's something that I don't think is the journalist is qualified to expound upon here, and it complicates the issue. But Lane does express some concern, which goes a long way towards defeating the reckless disregard part of third-degree murder, as far as Lane is concerned. Now, Chauvin dismisses him. It doesn't say that in here. In another one, it says that Chauvin, dismisses those things. And Chauvin is also kind of taunting Floyd or talking with Floyd, saying, well, maybe you should stop talking then and stuff like that. That goes more towards the reckless disregard element for Chauvin, or even towards potential intent. Although, again, I don't think that the second-degree murder charge is appropriate. I think the third-degree murder charge or a manslaughter charge are the appropriate charges here. About 16 minutes into Lane's video, Floyd stopped talking and appeared unresponsive. His last words was a whole bunch of stuff. And about a minute later, Hill called from off screen. Hill's the woman who is in the van with George Floyd. He's about to pass out. Lane says he thinks he's passing out. A minute after that, Kung checked Floyd's pulse, says he can't find one, and he stopped holding on to Floyd and moved further back, according to the journalist. So that may honestly be, if anything saves Kung, that might be it as well. Because if he stops restraining him because he's no longer moving in any way, then that could play in his favor. Chauvin and Lane continued restraining Floyd for about another 3 minutes until paramedics arrived. This again becomes a big question for Chauvin. He's unresponsive, you can't find a pulse, and you remain on his neck for 3 more minutes. And then, as we'll find out, the paramedics take an additional couple minutes to administer CPR. About 19 minutes and 40 seconds into Lane's video, paramedics arrived and took Floyd's pulse at his neck. Paramedic walked away without a sense of urgency. Medics loaded Floyd into the ambulance. Lane boarded the ambulance as well and took Floyd's pulse at the neck. About 3 minutes after the ambulance first arrived at the scene, a paramedic took Floyd's pulse and instructed Lane to begin performing CPR on him in the back of the ambulance. So again, you've got a significant amount of time passing before they administer any sort of care. He's been unresponsive for a while, and this is what's going to be argued about, that reckless disregard for the safety of George Floyd, resulting in his death. So medical device was placed on Floyd's chest a few minutes later to provide mechanical chest compressions until they arrived at Hennepin County Medical Center. The staff worked on him, who was unresponsive the entire time for about an hour, and he was pronounced dead at 9:25 p.m. So that's what we've got from this. This guy says it's baffling to pull the gun that quick over a forgery charge, he said, of Lane's initial contact with Floyd. That set the tone for the whole interaction. I don't really agree with that. I think they're focused on that. But I think the separation of time of 6 minutes from when because they have a whole interaction about the gun, and the officer actually says, I'm not going to shoot you. Floyd says, you know, good or whatever, and the officer holsters his gun. I don't think Floyd's under the impression he's going to get shot. And so I don't think that the gun interaction actually matters to this, and it's why it is frustrating to see sort of the exposition from someone else and the lack of transparency from the government. But in summary, for me, some big questions were answered. And that answer is, how did Floyd get into the car? How did Floyd get out of the car? So we know there was a struggle to get him into the car, according to the viewer. And that struggle was about 3 minutes. That's a significant amount of time to resist getting into a squad car. And it may justify some sort of restraint. They do get him in the squad car, and he continues to struggle and resist beyond that point, which is also very interesting. Whether or not that is considered resisting arrest when he's already handcuffed and restrained and in a vehicle will be, I guess, up to a jury to determine the mitigating factors there. But I would say that it's pretty safe to say that is some level of resistance and may involve further restrainer actions from the officer. Now, him squirming out of the cop car by himself, if he does that rather than being forcibly pulled out, that again goes into the idea that he is resisting officers' directions, and he is in some way resisting arrest. All of that said, I don't think in any way that exonerates Derek Chauvin for his kneeling pressure on the neck of George Floyd. I just don't think it does. It may have justified a short usage of a knee on the neck, maybe under the rules in Minneapolis, to restrain him temporarily. However, they've already got him handcuffed. They've already got him on his stomach, and they have 3 officers there. A knee being applied to the back of the neck for more than a couple seconds becomes excessive very, very quickly. When you get to the point that you're 9 minutes into this thing, and he's been unresponsive for 2 or 3 minutes up to that point, you're really pushing the envelope about just how much force you've used and whether or not your actions have become either reckless or even intentional. And those, of course, are the things that they were going to argue before, but we have a little bit more clarity now. Let's hope somebody either leaks the entire footage due to some crafty recording, or let's hope the judge opens it up for public review, maybe following the motion hearings for dismissal on officers Lane and Kung or something like that. But we really need to see these things to get the full context. But thank you for walking with me through part of this article. Again, I'll put it in the description. Go check it out. It is editorialized and slanted, but it's also very interesting to get more of the story laid out in the reason I like the Star Tribune writing is because they put a pretty good idea of the timeline in place with timestamps throughout the article, so you know the progression of how this is going on, and it helps you kind of visualize, if you're familiar with the footage that has been released, where we are in the process at this time. So it helps put those pieces together, put them in order, and add some dialogue and context to what's going on. So go check it out and read it for yourself. Go read some other ones and see what you think. Drop comments in the if you disagree with me or agree with me, please do. Let me know. And then also, if you like this video, please like it, share it, subscribe to the channel for more of these legal topics. Thank you for joining me today, guys. I hope you have a good day. Peace. Peace.